now it is time to get on to the first item on our docket. We need to give out our verdict and rule out an important question that now is being presented to the Supreme Court yet again. On Tuesday, the news broke that the Supreme Court's going to basically hear Masterpiece Cakeshop 2.0. Remember the famous case with the Christian baker who didn't want to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding that went all the way up to the Supreme Court? Well, we're essentially have a case that's super similar to that, that the court's going to hear. So, Hannah, are you ready? Are you excited to do this all over again?
I'm so excited to talk about this today because it's a really interesting issue, and you and I have had some fascinating conversations around this topic before, so I'm happy for us to take it public. But before we jump in, I do think it's important that we clarify why it's coming up again, because for many people, they probably don't know that when the baker situation happened, which is a quick refresher, there was this baker, he had a cake shop, he was happy to make cakes for gay people, but he didn't want to do same-sex marriages. And so there was this big free speech / religious liberty debate that was going on. It captured the nation's attention. It did go all the way up to the Supreme Court. And basically, the court ruled in his favor, but the way that they ruled in his favor didn't actually set the kind of precedent that we need to set. They didn't actually answer the question. So let's kind of clarify that first, Brad. What did they do in the previous case, and why is this coming up again?
Yeah, so they ruled, actually, there was a lot of consensus. I think it was 7-2 in that case. Could have been 6-3. But then the actual scope of the decision was super narrow, because what we need is a clear answer from the Supreme Court about whether your free speech rights, because these cases are kind of about religion, but the main legal question is free speech. We need a clear answer on whether your free speech allows you to refuse specific services that involve creation of speech. So it's not like I won't sell pizza slices to gay people. Nobody's talking about that. We're talking about a custom item or an expressive act that you disagree with. Do you have a right to refuse that specific service? We need a clear decision, because last time the court basically looked at it and said, well, in this case, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which is a government body, had pretty clear anti-Christian animus and bias, and that is unconstitutional.
That's who had sued the baker, right? Was this organization?
Well, so a gay couple had taken up charges with the Civil Rights Commission against the baker, but that commission was proven through this case to have basically been openly hostile to Christians. So the Supreme Court kind of dodged the question. But now, when we have Amy Coney Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, all of them on here. Yeah, Gorsuch Bay. We're going to see them actually hash this out, because a new case that's super similar, the Supreme Court just agreed to take it up. It's about a web designer in Colorado again, who is basically, it's a little weird because she hasn't started her business yet, but she wants to launch a website design company, yet state that she will not design websites promoting gay marriages or abortion or other content that violates her faith. But that's currently illegal to launch something with that kind of a statement of discrimination, in air quotes, under Colorado law. So she's like preemptively suing, which could complicate the legalness of this case. In terms of standing, we'll have to see. But the Supreme Court took this up, so it seems like they want to revisit this question with a more conservative court and give us a definitive answer.
Well, I think all of that is really very, very interesting. I'm kind of wonky when it comes to Supreme Court and constitutional litigation type issues. I think it's really fascinating. And what they did this past time around was basically ruled in favor of the baker, gave him a win, but they didn't actually answer the question, and therefore they didn't establish precedent, which for people who've never worked around litigation, that's usually what you're really trying to do. Like, you're trying to get an answer in the case itself, but when it comes to this kind of constitutional litigation, you're actually trying to establish precedent, because that's mostly how lower court judges will then interpret these decisions moving forward. And so they were trying to get a free speech precedent that said people have a right to free expression, and that includes not saying things that violate their religious beliefs or any other beliefs, right? So they didn't get that. Now it seems they're going for it again with another case. It's really unusual that she's actually suing over something that hasn't impacted her yet. I've not really heard of somebody preemptively suing like that in the past, but if the Supreme Court took it up, I guess that means they think she has standing, and we're going to get a decision on it. I think given the makeup of the courts, it's much more likely that we'll get a strong free speech precedent here. And this is really actually very cool because two things are happening in our society. While I feel like there is significant movement against free speech in the culture, against free expression in the culture, and through the legislative bodies who are increasingly going after private companies and individuals, going after things like Section 230, something very different has been happening in the courts over the past decade, where we have consistently seen a lot of really great precedent around free speech continue to be built up. The courts have been ruling really well on some of this. And so I've been pretty encouraged by that side of things. So I'm curious to see how they'll rule here. But I'm also curious to hear like your thoughts, Brad, about just this whole topic in general, because a lot is wrapped up here. We are talking about free speech. We're talking about the free market. We're also talking about religious liberty. And while I come from a religious background, you don't. While I'm straight, you are gay. And so we both have had very different experiences around this issue. And you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past, but I want you to tell our listeners kind of how you think through these things and where you come down, and then I'll give kind of where I'm at too.
Yes, for sure. So I've actually written and talked a lot about the original Masterpiece Cakeshop case. Not in a while, because it happened a few years ago now, but it was a case I cared about because I can separate two things. I literally am gay. I am very pro-gay marriage. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay, and I'm also not a believer in the Christian sense, or I'm kind of an agnostic. So I don't share any of the values of the people who are at stake here. But one thing you and I agree on is that you have to stand up for people's rights, even when it's, I wouldn't call them my enemies, but even when it's my opponents on a debate or a question, or who don't share my values. Because if you don't, you're not being consistent, and you either have to have a right for everybody or nobody has a right. So sometimes I think about it like this. If I ran a bake shop, or say a t-shirt customization shop, and somebody came in and wanted me to print that verse from Leviticus where it's like, man shall not lay with man, it is an abomination, or a Quran verse that talked about stoning gays, I would want the right to tell them to get out of my shop and refuse the service. And religious identity is a protected class under anti-discrimination law. So I do believe, and we have to make it clear to people, we're not talking about being able to just exempt from the Civil Rights Act or anti-discrimination law just by saying, my religion. It has to be something specifically speech related, an act of compelled speech. That's very different from selling pizzas, renting apartments, those kinds of things, like a restaurant. But if I'm asking you to do something that involves an act of expression that violates your conscience, I do believe that you should have that right, because I want that right for myself. So I actually interviewed Jack Phillips on my podcast about a year ago. We had a very respectful conversation. He seems like a decent person. We obviously have very different value systems, but he has to have that right if I can have my right. And so that's where I've always come down on this case, is erring on the side of, one of my main values is tolerance, not in the woke sense, which is actually kind of intolerant, but tolerance in the sense of, we don't have to agree, but I don't need to force my way on you, and you don't force your way on me. So I constantly attack radical social conservatives who defend things like anti-sodomy laws, or want the government to discriminate against gay people. But at the same time, I can't, on the other hand, support using the power of the state to bend them to my will. But however, I do believe in more broad, generic anti-discrimination protections that aren't speech related, but that's a whole nother issue. This is where I come down on the question in this case.
Well, I'm with you on all of this. I absolutely agree. I think that people have to be able to say, no, I'm a big believer in free speech and in free association. And this is one reason I've actually really struggled with the whole question of discrimination laws, because while I personally do not want to give my money to anybody who discriminates against anyone, I also feel like you've kind of got to be pretty far down the line of saying, like, people can do what they want and government shouldn't intervene, or you start getting into some of these territories that make me really uncomfortable. Now, while I was raised in a Christian home, my dad is a pastor, I break with a lot of what I was taught growing up. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay. This is a stand I started taking when I was like 11. Like, I just ethically always, I was like super woke on this issue at age 11. I was like, nope, this is wrong. And you made a point to me recently that I thought was so interesting. I hadn't thought about it in this frame, but you were talking about discrimination laws more at large. And you were saying that, religion is protected and you can't discriminate against people based on their religion, but religion is a choice. For most people, you choose your religion. Like maybe you were raised in it, but unless you're Jewish or something where you're ethnically born into it as well, you choose your religion. You don't choose being gay, and you don't really have a say in what your attraction is to other people. And so should that not also be protected? And I thought that was really well put, and I would agree with that. If we're going to have discrimination laws, then I think it should include things like that. But there needs to be a clear line of, you can't discriminate against people on the basis of who they are, but that doesn't mean you're compelled to create things or say things that violate your beliefs, whether they're religious or any other viewpoint. So I think we come down similarly on this, but
it's a nuanced
I still just struggle.
Answer. It's like so many people struggle with nuance. They think you're either pro-gay rights or anti-gay rights, or you're pro-religious freedom or anti-religious freedom. The truth on these issues is kind of tricky and nuanced and somewhere in the middle. In my ideal libertarian utopia where slavery never existed, then I would say we don't need a Civil Rights Act. We don't need anti-discrimination laws. Everybody can associate with whoever they want. The thing is, though, we don't live in that world. We have a dark history in this country of literal slavery and then Jim Crow. And so we need a Civil Rights Act, at least as far as race is concerned. And then what we did is we added religion to that, which I'm not necessarily against, but what I'm against is having religion as a protected class while not having sexual orientation and or gender identity as protected classes, which is the stance of a lot of conservatives or social conservative, legal organizations, which doesn't make any sense to me. So I think you either have to have your utopia or you have to have consistency, because why should people be protected for rejecting my beliefs and values, but I'm not protected in my beliefs and values, especially because being gay and also being gender dysphoric and persistently being trans throughout your life, there's nuances on that issue, but that is not a choice either. No one would ever choose that.
Listen, if it was a choice, every woman I know would choose to be gay, okay? We don't like that we're attracted to men. Men are mean. We would choose to be gay if we could. It's not a choice.
But you can choose your religion. So
you can choose your religion. And you can also choose what components of your religion you hold up. And this is where I really have beef with this issue, because if you look at religion, the history of any religion, it has been so politicized throughout centuries. You've had many people who've come in and written these books, who have weighed in, who have scrapped things they didn't like, added things for their own benefit. That's true throughout Christianity. I mean, even just look at how we got the King James version of the Bible, which was because a king in England wanted to have a divorce and basically had a whole new kind of system written to get away from the Catholic Church. And yet people act like this book is inherent. I don't agree with that at all. I also think if you start tracing back, and you and I have talked about this, some of the origins of what the actual Greek and Hebrew say around even being gay as a Christian, it actually is more referring to men sleeping with little boys, which was a practice in ancient Rome and Greece that was really very gross.
Yeah, of course.
So I have so many issues with people who continue to choose. I mean, if you look back at our history, the Bible and Christianity were used to defend slavery. They were used to defend racism, and now they've been used to defend homophobia. I absolutely reject that, and I believe that I can still be a Christian, love Jesus, try to model my life after him without accepting those components of religion. You still have free thought. You have your mind. I think God gave you your mind for a reason. Use it. Start thinking through some of these things and have better ethical stances. So all of those things are a choice. Your religion and what you choose to believe within your religion are your choices, and I think that you should be free to exercise those as long as they do not harm other people. But I also just really have to disavow people who continue to push for this class of people to have these special protections and to be able to use it against this class. So I agree with you. If we're going to have discrimination laws, it should be more blanketed. And I also have, come to realize that while I think discrimination laws are, they're really nuanced territory for me, because I think they can get into very problematic free market violations. After talking with a lot of my friends who are Black, after talking with a lot of my friends who are gay, who are in these classes, who have dealt with this kind of persecution, I have become aware that this is something that I do think we have to have in place, because we have seen throughout our society that unfortunately people do not choose to do the right thing, and the market does not always respond in such a manner to where people can get their needs met without this. And I wonder if it's like that in other countries. Do you know, do other countries have these issues, or is it just us in our history where we have to grapple with this?
Well, I will say to some extent they do. One of the things that the left will say sometimes is America obviously had a terrible system of slavery, but slavery was never unique to America, right? Slavery was a worldwide phenomenon. So a lot of places, I think America is much more diverse than a lot of places. So that's why we have a stronger legacy of a lot of this stuff, because we're so much more of a melting pot. But they had, entrenched homophobia and racism in Europe and in Asia and all sorts of places forever. I mean, they still do. I mean, there's dozens of countries that criminalize homosexuality still. So it's not a uniquely American thing. And I also think we've made robust progress. I mean, over 60% of Republicans support anti-discrimination protections broadly for gay and transgender people, yet a majority also believe that in specific circumstances, people like the cake baker shouldn't have to bake the cake. And we're actually getting close to 50% support for gay marriage with Republicans, too. So I really do think, especially generationally with young people, there's kind of been a sea change on this issue, but there's still some holdouts. And there's people on the Christian right who I respect and think come at this from totally different values in good faith. But then, unfortunately, there are still some who I genuinely think are motivated by animus and bigotry. And I really am not afraid to call out or push back on that. But broadly speaking, I think the place to do that is in an open marketplace of ideas, not like bringing in the state to say, you must print my shirt saying that iced coffee is great and hot coffee is homophobic.
Yeah. Well, you and I have talked about this briefly on the show before, but the whole history of gay rights is so fascinating to me. And they did so many things right in achieving their goals and being able to move us to this place quite quickly, really. Within the past 30, 40 years, all of this shifted dramatically. And what they did to do that is very different than what we see some of the activists in the LGBTQ community doing these days, which is trying to shout down people and get them canceled and call them out or force them to make wedding cakes or do things with their free speech that violate their views. And instead, they took a tactic that really invoked sympathy and started bringing people to the cause and to their side. I think that if we want to continue moving in that direction, we need to always try to exercise true tolerance, which is to say, I really dislike that view. I really dislike the view of the baker. I dislike, the view of anybody who would see people who are gay as anything other than totally equal and the same as heterosexual couples. But to change them, we don't change them by trying to sue them or shut them down. So I hope that the Supreme Court rules right. I think we have good cause to think that they will, and that we'll get good free speech protections here. And then we should continue using that free speech to try to change these people's minds.
Yeah, and I'm already going to tell you guys, you are going to see all over liberal media panic alarms about gay rights under attack and homophobic court if they rule in favor of this Colorado website designer. It's hyperbole. I mean, this same court ruled to add protections to employment law in Bostock for gay and transgender people. They're really going to follow the law and the Constitution where it takes them. They're not out to Neil Gorsuch is not out to get gay people or hate homophobic or anything. So you're going to see those panic screams, but I'm telling you now, you should just tune them out.